Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from Beyond. I'm Zeckthar,
And I'm Yuksen.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, yet for the next couple of months, we will be discussing the greatest disaster in the history of the Imperium of Mankind. That's right, folks, the Horus Heresy.
Indeed. Now, this will be interesting, because instead of covering a particular faction, we'll be following a timeline. Starting from the Great Crusade, we will end at the Siege of Terra.
That's right, but before we start, if you like our stuff, feel free to follow, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really like our voxes, feel free to join our membership program, like Sir Benter Biden, our very first member.
Quite right, brother. And thank you, Sir Bender Benteen. Well, what are we going to talk about today, Zeckthar?
Well, this week we will be talking about one of the most important parts of the prelude of the Horus Heresy, the Council of Nikaea.
Ooh, sounds great. But we should probably explain why this was all taking place, yes?
Absolutely. Very well. The stage is yours, sir.
Well, Magnus and two other Primarchs, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels and Jagatai Khan of the White Scars, proposed that librarius departments should be formed in the legions to harness the latent psychic powers that were beginning to manifest in the stardays of some legions. Initially, the Emperor sanctioned the experiments and then allowed the deliberate recruitment of psychic candidates into legions that didn't already possess such familiarity with the warp. However, as he withdrew from the fighting of the Crusade, many called for him to pass judgment on whether the experiment should continue. The reasoning for this was twofold. Firstly, as the Great Crusade reached further from the light of Terra, stranger and stranger foes were faced. Many times, the legions of Astartes, where the Imperial army would discover a new world, only to be met by hostile actions from beings who wielded mysterious, sorcerous-seeming powers that resembled those employed by the Thousand Sons and the Legion librarians. Now, Zeckthar, you may be wondering why this resemblance would be concerning.
Not really, but I'll play along. Why?
The key is the fact that sorcery was taboo.
But doesn't sorcery, along with all other psychic abilities, draw upon the warp?
True, but there is one key difference between the two.
What's that?
In comparison to other psychic abilities that draw upon the warp, sorcery requires interacting and cutting deals for knowledge and or power with entities of the warp in the pursuit of one's own selfish gain. Kind of makes me think of, light versus the dark side of the force.
Ah, gotcha. So the difference is psychers deal with the mind and using magical abilities through work and understanding, while sorcery is more like Terran 42's fantasy shamans or clerics, divining one's power through powerful entities.
Quite right.
Ah.
The second was that the Thousand Sons were seen to be potentially dangerously unstable by none other than Leman Russ, and long a distruster of the Thousand Sons' martial doctrines and battle philosophy. On the world of Shrike, Russ witnessed the Thousand Son fall victim to a malady called the flesh change, uncontrolled physical degeneration and grand mal mutation, apparently brought on by the loss of psychic control. Announcing that he had turned a blind eye to Magnus's obvious dabbling in black arts up to this point, the Wolf King declared that he was done ignoring his brother's tainted ways and claimed that the entire Thousand Sons Legion. He further promised a reckoning.
Yes, and I will be giving a full account of this in my next bonus box, The Burning of Prospero.
To even further compound on the issue, Mortarion, a longtime critic of the Thousand Sons and Psychers in general, was now openly accusing Magnus of sorcery, and that Corax and Rogel Dorn refused to field their legions alongside the Thousand Sons, and even other legions that deployed librarians upon occasion. Their outcry was now so insistent that it soon became a major point of contention across the Imperium, with the Primarchs split over the issue.
And so the council was set up on the planet of Nikaea. Nikaea was a world that, during the time of the Great Crusade, was in its geological infancy.
Clouds completely obscured the surface, while tectonic movement created constant pyroclastic eruptions and storms across the planet. Its very fabric in flux. Clods of ejected matter were caught in orbit or drifted across the system, with gravitational waves and electromagnetic discharges swamping local space. Navigating through all of this to a point on the surface would have been impossible, if not for a psychic beacon generated by the Emperor. Perturbo had designed and built the council chambers. Although originally designed as an arena for competitive events, the Emperor would later repurpose it for his own use. The council chambers were created on Nikaea within a hollowed-out stratovolcano, a massive amphitheater having been carved out of its heart. The beacon projected by the Emperor was visible to those with mind sight as a beacon of light shooting straight up out of the volcano, wreathed in golden lighting. Magnus saw this as a magnificent sign of the wonders of psychic powers, and a validation of his stance before the council even began. His chief librarian, Isaac Araman, on the other hand, was dismayed by the sheer power on display, realizing it was tied to a prophetic vision he had previously experienced that promised disaster. Security within the council was the privilege taken by the Adeptus Custodes, as was their right and duty when the Emperor himself was present. Though a three great companies strong force of space wolves were present to act, according to them, as a no-quarter safety measure in case Magnus had the wrong decision in reaction to events. They were accompanied by a detachment of the Sisters of Silence, which made their presence, and that of their Primarch Leman Russ, psychically undetectable. Arrivals in the council site had to submit control of their vessels to the Custodes' remote pilots, who berthed the ships at securing landing zones. Private quarters for attendees ringed the amphitheater, which itself could seat thousands upon the tiered black stone seating. The amphitheater was open to the elements, but workings of the Mechanicum kept the storm at bay. Massive environmental control machinery allowed the juvenile world to prematurely support life. The command and control position for the entire installation was staffed by several hundred operatives of the Imperial fleet, the hegemonic corps, the Space Wolves, the Sisters of Silence, and the Adeptus Custodes. The Emperor and his immediate retinue sat upon a pyramidal dais at one side of the amphitheater, the side opposite of which Magnus's quarters were located. The council was presided over by Malcador the Sigillite, Regent Lord of Terra and personal confidant of the Emperor. He carried the Emperor's golden scepter as a sign that he held authority over the assembled. The Thousand Sons delegation was the last to arrive, uninformed of the true nature of the council. Immediately after their arrival, Magnus and Araman were taken into a crowded public amphitheater to be sworn in. It was at this moment that they realized, with shocked dismay, the true nature of the council that had been summoned to attend, at least for them. The primary objective of the Council of Nikaea was to determine what to do about the librarian crisis that described the divisions between the legions over the continued use of librarians on the battlefield, and for Magnus to face the charges of sorcery. Many interpreted the council as in actuality the trial of Magnus the Red. He was accused of sorcery and of corrupting the Space Marine legions through the introduction of librarians into them, and their training by second warrior scholars of the Thousand Sons. Malcador announced that the gathering had been summoned to freely debate the issue, causing some consternation in the crowd, and whether the use of librarians was outright sorcery that caused a threat to human galactic domination, or if such claims were fearful, ignorant mulings. He closed these opening addresses with an invite for anyone to make the first speech. The first to stand was the rune priest of the Space Wolves, known as Othir Wairmek. Now, Yuksen, we're going to separate this into two groups, those opposed to Psychers and those for them. To do this, we'll have to go a little out of order in the events that took place.
That seems tricky.
Well, it might be. But fear not, folks. We will try to make this as simple as possible. Now, after Othir Wairmek spoke out against the Thousand Sons, and Yuksen will get to that in a minute, it was time for Magnus to speak. Magnus, whose appearance terrified many people on the council, recounted many great deeds of the librarians, and pointed out that the Psychers were essential to the running of the Imperium, gesturing to the assembled astropaths to illustrate his point. The more he spoke, the more at ease people were. His charisma soon swayed many in the crowd. He said that being fearful of the unknown was the mark of the ignorant and uneducated, of being ridiculously superstitious, and that those without the courage to face new ideas sought to swamp them with scaremongering. He pointed out that to people of previous historical periods, everything about a single individual at the council would be regarded as magic, and that such long ago people had beliefs that were proven wrong. The sun does not orbit Terra after all, for example. He then spoke of the future, telling of what great deeds psychers can achieve and how much of a travesty the Council of Nikaea would be seen as by future imperial citizens, as a barbarous event orchestrated by the ignorant. He refuted the claims against his legion, pointing out that the Thousand Sons fight at the forefront of the Great Crusade, taking the light of the Imperium to places others fear to tread and widening imperial knowledge with their hunt for information. He then told a parable of men sitting around a fire in the dark of an underground cavern. One of their number discovered the light of outside, but his fellows are unwilling to believe him, content with the light from their fire. Wishing to illuminate his fellows, the explorer works hard, digging a great tunnel into the ceiling of the cavern and bringing the light to all of his colleagues. That man knew he had to show his friends the truth, and strove to do so, despite the rejections and disbelief. Magnus claimed that, in this case, the light is knowledge of the warp, that he simply wanted to make available to everyone. In conclusion, he argued that no knowledge was tainted in and of itself, and no pursuit of knowledge was ever wrong so long as the seeker of that truth was the master of what he learned rather than its pawn. He spoke with finality that his 1,000 sons Astartes had mastered their knowledge of sorcery, and that there was no knowledge too labyrinthine for them to grasp, or that they could not master to serve mankind rather than enslaving it. Magnus called on the emperor not to ban the use of psychic abilities, but to contribute to further research into the usage, so that they might be harnessed more fully for the betterment of humanity and the Imperium. Now, Yuksen, what do you think of Magnus's arguments?
I think one of the flaws in itself is the fact that his idea that the pursuit of knowledge should overcome everything, just as a whole, is, yeah, it may sound good and all, but, let's be fair. Saying, if I shoot my foot, I bet I can make a way for it not to feel pain. Why are you going to shoot your foot? It's stupid.
Well,
because I want to prove a point.
Okay, well first
off,
after
you die.
Well, first off, from what you're saying, anyways, it sounds like honestly he would get along actually fairly well with the Mechanicum of Mars. That whole concept of just trying to continually pursue knowledge, no matter, anyways, if it's dangerous or not. And I agree with you, anyways. The concern is that the more that you would learn, anyways, about the warp and psychic abilities, how dangerous that is. But I would argue the point, anyways, that isn't gathering new information normally dangerous. I mean, for instance, that's the reason why humanity went to the stars, is they wanted to further advance, anyways, their knowledge.
I guess part of the difference would be the fact that in comparison to, yes, exploring the space, you aren't dealing with the devil.
What do you mean?
Well, as we mentioned, the use of sorcery is actually making deals with warp entities. In most cases, this would mean with the chaos gods.
Right. But it didn't.
So quite literally, you're basically making deals with.
Yuksen, hang on. Didn't we already talk about a guy who did make some deals with the warp entities?
Yes, and we know how much we love him, don't we?
Yeah, but at the same time, anyways, he has conquered pretty much most of the known galaxy.
But even he said that it shouldn't be done.
Even though he did it was, yes, do as I say, not as I do. But at the same time, I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that he didn't want anybody that he had to compete with. All I'm saying, and I agree with Magnus on this, anyways, is that education and the pursuit of knowledge in and of itself, while can it be dangerous, is not necessarily evil.
It depends on what the danger is. I think that's what it is.
The knowledge in and of itself isn't evil. Like, for instance, okay, I'll give you an example anyways. If you found out anyways that, I don't know, let's just use something ridiculous like force lightning. If that was actually just completely and utterly controlled anyways by Zinch. Okay, once you figured out that information, what you do with that information afterwards is really, anyways, the most important part of this. And his argument is that what we do with the information afterwards is that we're trying to better humanity and the Imperium. That's his whole goal.
Okay, but what did he have to sacrifice to get it?
Don't know.
That's the point.
All I'm saying, Yuksen, is that
I
understand what he's saying.
I understand what he's saying. It's that the pursuit of knowledge is something that should be done. Is like, yeah, I understand that, and the fact that it can be dangerous. Yeah, I understand that. It's judging what that danger will be.
Right. So,
when
like I was going to say, anyways,
that's the problem.
So, like I was going to say, anyways, it's got to be tempered by logic and reason.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, I do agree with Magnus on the point, anyways, that knowledge in and of itself isn't necessarily evil. It's what you do with that knowledge afterwards. It's that it needs to be tempered by reason and logic. Which, by the way, I don't know if you mentioned this yet or not, but he doesn't really go into that whole concept of like, well, what would you use and what wouldn't you use? Where is that logic? Where is that reason? I don't think he really goes into that. It's just the pursuit of knowledge. But I'm glad that you gave your 2 cents on why the warp should be explored. Well, okay, you really didn't. I did, but my psychers. But why don't you, because you seem pretty much against this anyways, why don't you tell us anyways about the opposition, what they thought?
Okay, right. Well, those amongst who were against the Psychers were Constanza Swati Falcon.
Who's he?
He was the Grand Admiral of the Imperial Armada. And then we had Kelbor Hal.
Who's he?
The Fabricator General of the Martian Mechanicum. And then we have Corvus Corax.
Who is he?
A bloody Primarch, you goob.
Oh yeah, right. I knew that. Sorry.
Of the Raven Guard.
Right.
But the most against Psychers was Mortarion, the Primarch of the Death Guard.
Really? Why?
Well, I know people mention this all the time. It's like, Mortarion, well, he hates Psychers. Why? Because of his past. Well, people just say that, but they don't realize, okay, his past was, just saying it is screwed up is
a minor footnote.
Basically, what ended up happening was he was found by one of many overlords that were sorcery wielding necromancers.
Right.
And he was raised in this little tower all by himself. And he would ask questions about the things that are in the fields, and the person would say, well, yeah, we'll talk about that some other time. They're just things, basically. And so Mortarion, realizing he won't get his answers, breaks out, and he ends up going down there. He ends up finding out that, oh, wait, these people are basically being used as playthings and slaves happen to be humans.
Right.
And the fact that all of the Psychers were sorcery users, first of all, and they'd create monstrosities and just have them hunt down humans, and they'd just mass mayhem, cruelty, destruction, whatever you want to call it. Putting that in perspective, you can kind of see why he would be against Psychers in general, or at least the use of psychic powers.
Right, because he'd seen firsthand what the rule of a Psycher would look like.
Right.
That was his big concern. And honestly, that's also one of the main reasons why he always kind of had a problem with the Emperor.
Well, that plus the Emperor took
the Emperor, the biggest Psycher of them all, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, and say what you will, anyways, but we've talked about it already. He's already kind of made some deals with the dark gods of chaos, which in our book, what we just described, anyways, isn't that sorcery?
Yeah.
So there's this whole concept. I can see why, anyways, with his upbringing and looking at this, why he would have such a problem with Psychers, because he's seen, anyways, how this power can corrupt people. And it ends up, anyways, being destructive for mankind.
Yeah, it's more of, though, when they use the abilities so much as them themselves. Well,
Well,
we'll talk about that later.
It's the concept, anyways, of the addiction to power.
Right.
And having a power, anyways, that not everybody can wield. And it can affect, massive amounts of people. But anyways,
well, like if somebody went around in a Titan where everybody has pitchforks and just went, I think I'll pick off this person. Why? Because I can.
Or tank. Yeah, it wouldn't even have to be a Titan. It could be just a tank. But anyways, who else, anyways, had problems with this? I mean, so the big two guys, anyways, that really had a problem with this though was Mortarion and Leman Russ, right?
Well, other than Korax, who wouldn't field anybody.
Well, yeah, no. What I'm saying is that the two people that really were pushing in this, anyways, was Mortarion and Leman.
Well,
Leman because he,
yeah. I mean, more Leman, because of one of the reasons why Leman Russ was really pushing it at this point was mainly because he was actually seeing the flesh change.
Yeah, which I'll talk about in our bonus box. But who else, anyways, was there, anyways, that had problems with Magnus and his fellows?
Well, you had the witch hunters, which presented their case reciting a litany of human suffering inflicted upon the Emperor's own subjects by sorcerers enslaved by chaos, of gibbering mutants who had lost all humanity, and of cults and power-hungry men who turned their psychic gifts to dark purposes. The first to speak, however, in the Council of Nikaea, Othir Weirdmake, as a psyker himself and as someone considered to be a respected colleague and friend by Ahriman, may have been thought to have spoken out in defense of the librarians. But quite the opposite, he claimed knowledge of the Thousand Sun sorcery due to fighting alongside them on Shrike and Agoru. He denounced each and every one of them as warlocks, deceivers, and sorcerers, swearing the truth of the matter upon his oath of loyalty to Leman Russ. Malkador commented that this was a serious accusation and asked if anyone would support it. Mortarion, Primarch of the Death Guard Legion, stepped forth. Mortarion repeated his charge that Magnus was a practitioner of sorcery. He illuminated his side of the debate by reminding listeners of his personal experience and the worlds he had seen ruined by individuals who peered too long into dark places. He further reminded them all that the time of old night was caused by psychers, their actions almost destroying their species. He pointed to the existence of the Sisters of Silence, an imperial body specifically created to do the apparent essential job of not only guarding against the danger of psychers, but hunting them down. He dwelled upon horrific imagery he had seen, memories of sorcerers' powers and the horrors they can conjure, and the power of such arcane barbarians to hold off or defeat imperial purity. He closed by saying that he did not believe that Magnus was such a monstrous person as he had described and dealt with in his younger days, but that he was walking on the same path. Acknowledging his long-held anti-librarian beliefs, he pressed that he was condemning Magnus not out of hate, but out of brotherly love and concern, so that Magnus may stop before it is too late. Now, brother, do you truly believe Mortarion's words, or was he using brotherly love as a stopping point?
I honestly think he was just using it as a stopping point. From what I've gathered, Mortarion and Magnus were never really close. In quite fact, the opposite. Mainly because, as we talked about, Magnus is the big wizard dude. And Mortarion hates wizards. So why on earth would he, get along with him?
He hated people using wizard powers.
Well, yeah. It's kind of the same difference. Yes, he did have some people in his retinue that were, in fact, wizards at one point or another. Like, for instance, Typhus. But was that?
Who actually would end up becoming his number 2 guy. Basically.
Yeah, he was, I think, first captain?
Yeah.
And Typhus is a terrible person, but We'll get into that probably later.
Well, after Erebus slashed onto him, yeah.
Another terrible person. There's like 4 or 5 Space Marines that are out there anyways that I just can't stand. Typhus happens to be one of them. But anyways,
you find out all of them were all connected to Erebus. It's like, that's why.
yeah, Erebus is pretty much number 1 on the list. I mean, I can't think of anybody else. I think anyways, they're concerned. Well, okay, so the people that are arguing against this anyways, I think have the same concern that you do, Yuksen. It's this aspect of, yes, we agree with you, the pursuit of knowledge in and of itself isn't necessarily evil, but who's tempering this with reason and logic?
Right.
And more like, for instance, Mortarian's big concern is that he's actually seen firsthand what that looks like when there is no logic or reason behind it.
Yeah.
And it's just used simply as a controlling mechanism and power. And it's incredibly addictive, and it eventually destroys everything. So I can see anyways their argument behind it. I can see both sides of this argument actually fairly well. I mean, it's actually a fairly decent argument. But during this time, wasn't there was something else that actually took place that was fairly interesting that we do kind of have to briefly go over. And that was Casper.
Yes. We mentioned Casper before, I think twice in 2 different
we talked about
boxes.
Bjorn, I believe.
When we talked about Bjorn, and then there's another case when we talked about him a little bit because you claimed he was a hidden one.
Right. Yeah. Because he was in the retinue of Lehman Russ. When we talked about Lehman Russ, and we did go over a little bit anyways, the burning of Prospero in that Vox. So if you want to check it out, it's Lehman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves. But
and then you also have a bit in
when you talk about Bjorn,
noble characters.
Right. But he actually, okay, so I can't, is he wasn't actually on Nikaea, was he? Or he was?
Yes,
he was. Okay, yeah. So
he was like, though he wasn't at the council itself. He was in like one of those adjunct places. It's like 1,000 whatever feet away. And he was being guarded by one of the custodes. And a person was talking to him, portraying to be 1,000 Sun, named Amon. He was supposed to be the equerry of Magnus the Red. And during discussion between him and Casper, apparently Casper ended up ticking him off, and so he started using what is called true name sorcery and started just basically killing everybody till he was delayed by Bjorn. And then Sisters of Silence showed up along with 2 dreadnoughts and a rune priest, and they just annihilated Amon, or claimed was Amon. But later, after these reports were sent, and I assume they did have a little bit of impact here on the decision. The Space Wolves did send a report on this occurring to the council, but later they ended up finding out that it wasn't actually a sorcerer of 1,000 Suns, but a demon. And so the Emperor gave his verdict.
Wait. There was actually one last party that spoke at the Council of Nikaea.
Oh, yeah. I forgot. Well, what did they say?
Well, the last to speak was a cadre of Space Marine librarians, whom the Emperor acknowledged with a nod, and all present fell silent. Among the group were some of the greatest librarians of the Space Marine legions. They formed a semicircle around the dais to indicate that they spoke as one voice, but it was a young librarian apostolary who spoke for the group. A psyker, he proposed, was like an athlete, a gifted individual whose native talent must be carefully nurtured. Psykers were not innately evil in themselves, but like any tool, could be used for either good or evil purposes. Sorcery, however, like we said before, was a knowledge of how to wield psychic powers that had to be sought for, even bargained for, with the foul entities of the warp. No one could be truly sure who or what had benefited in the deal. The librarians proposed that all psykers be strictly educated by the Imperium, and the express purpose of using their abilities to serve mankind. This should become an immediate Imperial priority. The practice of psychic sorcery would forever be outlawed as an unforgivable offense against mankind and the worst kind of heresy against the imperial truth.
And so, hearing the words of his followers, the emperor issued what would become known as the Edict of Nikaea, decreeing that the legions of Astartes, beyond the use of navigators and astropaths, would no longer employ psychers. The main reason for this was because the Council of Nikaea was not just what to do with the librarians, but also the trial of Magnus the Red. As evidence of Magnus's continued practice of sorcery became apparent, the emperor barely contained his wrath as he pronounced judgment on the Primarch of the Thousand Sons, for he had entrusted his son many Terran years before to obey his bidding and forswear the use of such occult practices because of the danger inherent to the warp. He had entrusted only Magnus with the secrets of the warp and the existence of the terrible entities later known by humanity as the Chaos Gods, to which only they remained privy. But it now appeared that his gene-son had disobeyed his edicts, and at the very least dabbled in the occult and the forbidden black arts of sorcery by repeatedly trading with the denizens of the warp. The confrontation between father and son is recorded in the Grimoire Hereticus. And so the librarious departments were disbanded, the librarians redeployed to battle companies, and the Primarchs themselves were refrained from using any psychic powers they possessed. This, of course, applied to Magnus, whose use of sorcery was declared not proven. The following is a transcript of the emperor's speech upon his decree absolute that became known as the Edicts of Nikaea, drawn upon the oldest of imperial records.
Hear now the words of my ruling. I'm not blind to the needs of the Imperium, but nor am I blind to the realities of the hearts of men. I hear men speak of knowledge and power as though they are abstract concepts to be employed as simply as a sword or gun. They are not. Power is a living force, and the danger with power is obsession. A man who obtains a measure of power will find it comes to dominate his life until all he can think of is acquisition of more. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but few can stand the ultimate test of character, that of wielding power without succumbing to its darker temptations. Peering into the darkness to gain knowledge of the warp is fraught with peril, for it is an inconstant place of shifting reality, capricious lies, and untruths. The seeker after truth must have a care he is not deceived, for false knowledge is far more dangerous than ignorance. All men wish to possess knowledge, but few are willing to pay the price. Always men will seek to take the shortcut, the quick route to power, and it is a man's own mind, not his enemy or foe, that will lure him to evil ways. True knowledge is gained only after the acquisition of wisdom. Without wisdom, a powerful person does not become more powerful. He becomes reckless. His power will turn on him and eventually destroy all that he has built. Let me get a shot of this whiskey here. I have walked the paths no man can know and faced the unnumberable creatures of the warp. I understand all too well the secrets and dangers that lurk in its hidden darkness. Such things are not for lesser minds to know, no matter how powerful or knowledgeable they believe themselves to be. The secrets I have shared serve as warnings, not enticements to further explore. Only death and damnation await those who pry too deeply into secrets not meant for mortals. I see now I have allowed my sons to delve too profoundly into matters I should never have permitted them to know even existed. Let it be known that no one shall suffer censure, for this conclave is to serve unity, not discord. But no more shall the threat of sorcery be allowed to taint the warriors of the Astartes. Henceforth, it is my will that no legion will maintain a librarian's department. All its warriors and instructors must be returned to the battle companies and never again employ any psychic powers. Woe betide he who ignores my warnings and breaks faith with me. He shall be my enemy, and I will visit such destruction upon him and his followers that, until the end of all things, he shall rue the day he turned from my light.
He also personally issued the following warning to Magnus.
If you treat with a warp, Magnus, I shall visit destruction upon you, and your legion's name will be struck from the Imperial records for all time.
So, brother, what is your opinion of the decree and the council as a whole?
Honestly, out of all three parties that spoke, I actually kind of agree with the librarians the most. What about you?
Yeah, I'd also agree with that too.
I mean, go ahead.
Their idea is, first off, don't make deals with the devil. So there's a plus there. Second of all, if they have the ability and you're able to hone it, it's kind of like if somebody has a skill that nobody else can use and you can hone it to be more efficient and better, but at the same time, not self-inflicting per se, it would be wise to do that.
The only thing I really disagreed with them was the whole concept of an athlete. They just missed, I would say, a professional athlete. Because I think everybody kind of has the ability to be an athlete. Everybody kind of has that ability to, throw a baseball or, a football.
Well, not servitors.
What's that? Well,
not servitors.
Yeah, they're kind of not human at this point. But anyways, I would say more of like a professional athlete, someone that is actually gifted with more abilities in that. Because if you just say athlete, it means that everybody could, be a psyker if they wanted to. And not everybody has the psychic capabilities to do that. But I do agree with them anyways, the concept of using it like a tool. It's like I mentioned before anyways, like a wizard anyways, trying to learn knowledge, but then tempering it. Like I've said this about 5 times now, tempering it with logic and reason.
Right.
And yeah, I kind of agree with them. I think honestly, out of all this anyways, if they had gone with this third option, I think Magnus would have been cool with it too. And his peoples.
Maybe not.
Well, why don't you think so?
Well, I think he was already reaching for, I think personally it kind of already gone past that point because he had already, as far as I'm aware of, already made a few deals that really had affected his legion already.
Like what?
Like deals that ended up causing the flesh change?
No, I mean like more like specifically. I mean, I know anyways. Yeah, I think the flesh change is kind of a very apparent thing that shows anyways that some sort of deals were going on, but I haven't looked into it too much anyways. So I was wondering if you knew anyways of any specific details, because I know after, for instance, the burning of Prospero, he makes quite a few deals with Zinj.
Well, yeah.
And before that anyways, I don't know anything really actually specifically.
I think he made 1 or 2 beforehand as well.
Right. What were they for?
I couldn't tell you for sure.
Okay. Well, if anybody is listening to this, if you know of some anyways, go ahead and plug it in the comments so that we can, look it up. But I think anyways that Magnus was smart enough anyways, at least, yes, he would have, I mean, he wanted the whole pie, but I think he would have been fine anyways having a big chunk of it too.
Right.
I think he would eventually, I think he would continue trying to push the envelope, but I think he would have been fine with that outcome. Now, the only one that honestly I think he wouldn't have been fine with was, well, what took place. The Emperor sided with Lehman Russ and Mortarion. And what ends up happening, spoiler alert for you people out there, what ends up happening is that instead of abiding by the Emperor's will, Magnus and his thousand
really
sons
delving into sorcery.
Yeah, really starts delving into it. It's like, well, fine, I'll show you. And then really starts to get into it. So it's like,
and then he does something even more stupid and decides to use his psychic abilities to send a message
Yeah, which ends
to
up
the Emperor, who specifically stated, "If I catch you doing anything concerning psychic related, you shall burn."
right. And yeah, and we will get into that because it's fairly important. I'll actually get into that in the bonus box, and we kind of talked about it actually with Lehman Russ, didn't we, when we talked about the burning of Prospero?
A little.
How I mean, it caused so much damage, him trying to get this message to the Emperor.
Yeah.
It ended up destroying, if I recall right, the Webway project, didn't it? Because he broke through all like these psychic barriers, and unfortunately, when he broke through them all the demons of chaos pretty much followed him in with it. So they had to spend, weeks and months anyways, just like hacking back the demons to get the thing back into operation, which it never fully did, if I recall right.
No.
So real quick, anyways, in closing, this is, like I said, this is very important because the reason why this is important, because after this takes place, Magnus kind of goes off the deep end and in secret starts to really delve into sorcery along with 1,000 Suns, which causes one of the big catastrophic events like we were just talking about with the Webway portal project. And it causes its destruction pretty much. And not only that, but if I recall right, that's one of the reasons why the Emperor is pretty much absent throughout most of the Horus Heresy, because he's trying to get this thing fixed so that it doesn't, like hundreds of thousands of demons don't just start popping up on Terra.
Well, I don't think that's the original reason. I think because one of the things that they mention, that's been mentioned, looking over the tomes that we have, was the fact that the demon that was killed off, the Casper Hauser demon person, what they were trying to do was purposefully pit the 1,000 Suns versus the Space Wolves against each other, trying to get them both to be wiped out.
Okay. Well, why would Zinch want to wipe out the 1,000 Suns? That doesn't make any sense. Or are you saying it was a different chaos entity?
I assume it'd be a different chaos entity.
Okay, well, that makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, so when you're looking at the Horus Heresy and the prelude to the Horus Heresy, there's like 3 major events that take place that cause the ball rolling and eventually, anyways, ends up with the complete destruction and the Civil War. And this is like the first of the major ones. Now, next week, anyways, we're going to go into probably the most important character of the Horus Heresy, the man himself, and his whole thing with Erebus. Honestly, if Erebus had been sucked out of a spaceship, anyways, and just ended up floating off into space and dying, none of this would have taken place. But yeah, so 2 of these things we've already kind of talked about. This is the first one, which is the Council of Nikaea. The second one is Lorgar, which we kind of briefly discussed. And if you want to know more about that, you can look up the Imperial Cult. But the Emperor, anyways, chastising him and having his whole word bearers and himself bend the knee to him. That was the second thing that takes place. So Lorgar goes out and he finds the Chaos Gods. So it's interesting because of situations that the Emperor has put these people in. Ironically, they end up finding the Chaos Gods. So, I mean, I think you can agree with me here, Yuksen, anyways.
Well, except for Mortarion.
What do you mean?
You didn't find them because of that.
No. I'm saying because these major events, anyways, one of the catalysts of these major events, the 2 that we're talking about, is that these guys, anyways, go off and they start, making pacts with the Chaos Gods because of this. Now, I think you'll agree with me, Yuksen, that there's no perfect leader. And I would say the Emperor's along the same lines here. But he doesn't mess up very often, in my opinion, but when he does, it's a doozy. It's a doozy, Yuksen. It's just, it's one of those just like, oh, wow, when you swing for the fences, you swing hard, man. I mean, this ball is gone. Well, you got anything else, anyways, that you have interesting note about the Council of Nikaea? Or
The victors got what they wanted.
but did they? Did they really?
Well, they did for a brief time.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Okay, so here's a question real quick before we take off. Do you think Mortarion was actually happy with the outcome? First off, do you think Mortarion's ever happy? I mean, that's probably the first question.
Well, part of his body was melted, so probably not.
He's probably not a happy person just anytime.
Yeah. It's like, oh, we have all the cures in the world, but you're still going to be somewhat misshapen. Why? And in pain.
Well, on that horrible note, that's all the time we have for this week. But join us next week as we discuss the most important person in heresy, Horus Lupercal.
Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this box. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. And don't forget to check out the shop. We got some cool stuff there, like clothes, pillows, and hats.
Yep, and don't forget rabbits, Yuksen.
Right, and don't forget the rabbits.
Have a great day. And as always,
Until next time, this is Zeckthar,
And Yuksen.
signing off.